I'm white, and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
Okay. All right, everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. Welcome live viewers who are hanging out for a while. And welcome podcast listeners. We do the show live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific right here on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. If you joined our Twitch stream, you would see that our chat is throwing tinfoil hats at us. I'm producer Dave. You can find me on Grindr, the co-host with the pink mic. Who are you? What's going on?
I am HK Perrin, and you can find me on Mastodon at HKPerrin. No, sorry, at HPerrin at port87.social. It's the only social network I'm on. I guess I'm also on Discord, but yeah, follow me there. And then our guest this week.
Hey everybody. It's good to see chat again. I'm Homozygoat. My actual name is Marcus. Use whichever name makes you happy. You can find me at twitch.tv/Homozygoat, spelled like the animal, not like the science term. Thank you for having me back. And I am not looking forward to talking about this specific issue because it's everywhere and I have not stopped talking about it for like the past week and I'm already tired of it.
Well, I mean, you know,
we'll be able to put technology directly into our brains.
I mean, the point that this is the, if people don't know, we're going back to where it started. We're going to do a Sam Harris episode. This is Sam Harris is my take is that he wanted to go with, I'm going to believe the scientific consensus. And then he's like, oh, I'm not popular with the cool kids anymore. And so now he apparently did a Lab League episode. And so he's got two people on. Marcus, who are Matt Ridley and Alina Chan before we get started?
Oh God, these are two, like, how do I even describe them? I mean, grifters is a very, I guess, intro level term to describe these two. They're like a fine aged grifter, aged in a barrel that came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Like these two have been some of the like OG lab leak pushing hog grifters that have manifested during the pandemic. Alina Chan is currently a postdoc. She has a PhD and she's currently doing a postdoctoral fellowship at the Broad Institute, which is a big, like, actual, like, institute where people do legitimate, credible work. When COVID hit, she basically decided for one reason or another, I don't know if this was to be like anti-China, since I think she's Chinese, or for some other reason, she decided to torch her entire career and hop on the right-wing grifting train and say, yep, COVID was made in a laboratory. I have a PhD. I am the understander of science. Therefore, it came from a laboratory. Please support me and buy my book. Matt Ridley is the other goon who more or less hopped on board with with Alina Chan in this giant grift. He is more of a he's more of a character. I don't even know how to describe him. He's like a former MP. He's a science writer. He's a journalist. So he came from Turf Island. He came from the UK essentially, and he decided to hop on board with Alina Chan when the "where did the virus come from" discussions first started manifesting in like 2020 and 2021. So he more or less was the I know how to like market Alina Chan person in this like a god awful duo. And so the two of them like teamed up and took advantage of Alina Chan's credentials, Matt Ridley's journalistic background, and they knew how to create a book and create like a marketing campaign and a media blitz around said book. Interestingly enough, Matt Ridley does also have some intersections with people like Richard Dawkins. So he's kind of been hovering around the IDW a bit, but he's never really like made a foray in there. He was smart enough to not do that, but dumb enough to hop on the Lab Leak train. So not a particularly redeemable human being. So long story short, these are grifters from like the 2021 era of the pandemic who are selling a book and making the rounds from Tucker to now Sam Harris.
Everybody's zen.
Welcome to the Making Sense podcast. This is Sam Harris.
Okay.
Just a note to say that if you're hearing this, you are not currently on our subscriber feed and will only be hearing the first part of this conversation.
That's fine with me. It's an hour.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
The Making Sense podcast. You'll need to subscribe.
I wonder if he's going to cut it off mid-sentence.
Oh, he does. Remember he did that when he was like arguing with that lady? It was a trope. Like, oh God, that was the worst. When she was like trying to explain to him why he's racist, and he just cut her right off. Said, you got to pay for the rest of this. Actually, you don't.
To add to your favorite podcatcher, along with other subscriber-only content. We don't run ads on the podcast, and therefore it's made possible entirely through the support of our subscribers. So if you enjoy
And a
what we're
trust
doing
fund.
here, please consider becoming.
Yeah, like it's a podcast. It's not super expensive.
Well, there's a lot happening with AI these days. The chatbot
Is Sam going to come out as an AI?
powered by OpenAI's
I am Harris bot.
called Sydney, apparently. Seems to have gone a
It's
little
Sam
crazy.
Harris, but the A in Harris is AI,
A high-level
Oh.
computer at Go.
but it's still pronounced Sam Harris.
Previously
Yeah,
considered
or it's the A and Sam and the I and Harris. They're
the
capitalized. Everything else lowercase.
Looking a little sketchy. I think I'll do another AI-focused podcast pretty soon. Seems like
Please
there's a lot
don't.
to talk about. But today we are talking about the origins of the COVID pandemic. And
Great.
for that conversation, I have Matt Ridley and Alina Chan. Matt is a writer. His books have been translated into 31 languages and won many awards. They
And
include
is he
Red
going to
Team,
invite anyone on
Genome,
with the
Rational
opposing view?
Optimist, and the
Never.
Evolution of Everything.
Of course not.
And his new book,
Because if that happens,
with
the podcast
Alina
ends
Chan,
very quickly.
is Viral, The Search for the Origin of COVID-19. Matt also sat in the House of Lords between 2013 and 2021 and served on the Science and Technology Select Committee there and the Artificial Intelligence Select Committee.
Clearly, he learned nothing on either of those
Founding
committees.
Chairman,
None of that sounds like virology to me, but or infectious disease. None of it.
and he created the Mind and Matter column for the Wall Street Journal in 2010 and was a columnist there from 2013 to 2018. He is a
Still
fellow
not
of the
virology.
Royal Society of Literature and of the Academy.
Dude, are you
of
reading his
Sciences.
CV? Sam,
He is a
stop.
foreign
He does this a
honorary member of
lot.
The American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Alina Chan is a scientific advisor and viral vector engineer at the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard,
Yeah, I engineer viral vectors too. That's not exciting.
and Human Frontier Science Program Fellow with a background in medical genetics.
What
synthetic
does a
biology,
viral
and
vector
genetic
engineer
engineering.
do?
During the pandemic, Dr.
Good
Chan
That
question.
makes viruses for laboratory use. So essentially, if you need a virus to infect a mouse or to infect a bunch of cells growing in a petri dish, you can make a laboratory safe virus to do just that. So it's basically moving lots of small volumes of liquid into different tubes.
investigated the problems relevant to finding the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 virus And in 2022, she joined the Pathogens Project Task Force, which was organized by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And the purpose of this
Bulletin of
project was to
Atomic, like what the
generate
fuck
new
is this?
thinking
Just all
on-
sounds like I know these are all real things, but some of this stuff just sounds made up. It sounds like it's from like the villain in a superhero movie would be from the Bulletin of Atomic Science or whatever. Like
It sounds like she does have the credentials to know what she's talking about. So it saddens me that, you know, it also sounds like she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Oh, I think like, and this has been like my domain for the past couple of years. People who have really legitimate and valid credentials, like Alina Chan, they know exactly what they're doing. It's clear cut that they have a lot of scientific training and they throw it all away to grift. Like that is a very sad career path to sacrifice all that time to get a PhD, to be a postdoc at a big biotech institute, only to be like, actually, yeah, podcasts and books, that's what I want instead. I'm not going to, I'm going to make claims that my training should have prevented me from making, but I'm ignoring everything that I learned for like the past 6 years of my life because I want money. That's pretty much how it goes.
On high-risk pathogen research and to help prevent future lab-based outbreaks.
I
As
call
I
it
said,
the
the topic today is
right-wing
the
grift
origin of
shift,
COVID.
and
More precisely, the SARS-CoV-2.
you know, if
virus.
she's not done with it
Discuss the
yet, then
evidence
her
lab
her
leak
grift shift
from the
will
Wuhan Institute of
definitely
Virology.
conclude with a
Talk about
podcast.
media and academic censorship of this topic.
Well, she is unhireable in academia now since she's done this. Nobody wants her.
In Chinese
So
labs.
it's all she has left.
The problems with so-called gain-of-function research, the evidence for the zoonotic origins of SARS-CoV-2, such as it is, the initial complacency and denialism of the Chinese, the biosafety levels at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the molecular evidence of a lab leak, the practical constraints on synthesizing.
you don't have to do a table of contents for your
lack of
podcast,
international
Sam.
Operation, conspiracy theories.
That's not gonna stop him.
promulgated By the CCP, the EcoHealth Alliance, different kinds of gain-of-function research, virus hunting, risk and reward in the search for knowledge, Anthony Fauci.
For virus hunting,
And
you
other
need a
topics.
really tiny gun.
Anyway, I found it a fascinating
Tiny gun.
and also fairly confounding conversation. This is one of those topics where you just can't believe we're in the situation that we're in, given bad incentives and
What kind of
basic
scope you got on your gun?
stupidity.
Uh,
Anyway, Matt and
Micro
Alina were great
scope.
guides to the topic, so I hope you find this useful. And now I bring you Matt Ridley and Alina Chan.
My God, the melodramatic music.
I am here with Matt Ridley and Alina Chan. Matt,
These are the two
Alina,
most
thanks for
boring
joining
sons of
Great to
bitches.
be with you.
Same.
So we're going to talk about your.
I mean, it
book
wouldn't really work
that,
if he had some kind of like banging intro, right?
I mean, you're not wrong, but at the same time, like this is such an old, played out trope. Like, I don't give me some house music. Give me a banger, man. Like something that's not 60 minutes documentary. Did it come from a laboratory?
It's all boom boom. It's all boom boom bap a boom boom bap. Boom
I would
boom
rather,
bap a
I
boom
would
boom
rather
bap.
have you beatbox as the intro to Sam Harris bringing on a guest, unironically.
Okay.
that was
When did
a
it first come out?
5-minute
It's now in
intro.
Paperback. When did you first publish this?
You had to read their CV and
Oh,
the entire
wait, the
table of
intro's still
contents.
going.
Search for
He's,
the origin
he's still
of
fucking
COVID-19.
talking about her book.
When was the book first published?
Came out in the fall of
Priorities.
2021
Mhm.
and paperback, which was updated in the spring of 2022. Is that right, Alina, or have I got the name? The year?
We already
Yes.
learned about the book in the intro.
June last year.
Mhm.
Okay. So obviously we will incorporate any up-to-the-minute findings or thoughts or misgivings or retractions or epiphanies.
Oh, sure you will,
have.
Sam.
And
Retraction epiphanies.
this is
They're
a
going to
topic
focus
that
more on the epiphanies than the
has always
retractions for
been
sure.
interesting and consequential. I think, let me just put my prior cards on the table. I always felt that speculation about the origins of COVID was more or less irrelevant and perhaps counterproductive at the very beginning. I mean, once we knew we had a pandemic on our hands and we knew we had sequenced the genome of the virus, it seemed to me that the first order of business for
Good
a considerable
God.
period of time was to
Sam Harris podcast is $15 a month.
Did very quickly, and to try
To hear him
as much
filibuster his
cooperation
guests, no
as we
thanks.
could in all of our
That's
collective
like
efforts
as much
to,
as Netflix.
not have the pandemic be
And
as
Netflix
bad
gives
as it
you
might be.
thousands
But
of hours of
obviously,
shitty content.
Great. We'll do a
pushback
Netflix podcast
against
next week.
Speculation about this topic that emerged fairly quickly always seemed crazy and disingenuous. It was never racist to worry that this had leaked out of a lab. And it's, obviously quite consequential.
It kind of was, though.
Well, it isn't necessarily racist. It's just that racists were using it like as like racist fodder. It doesn't like they don't. Sam always he's like, oh well, this particular thing I don't personally find it to be racist. It's well, like the racists really like it, Sam. So does that matter to you at all?
Right. It's more that you align yourselves with people who use this for racism purposes. So think about that. If you're lying down with the dogs, are you cool with getting up with fleas? Because that's what's going to happen, homie.
For me, it's the fact that there wasn't evidence for it coming out of the lab, and yet a lot of people were spreading that.
Yes, that's a conspiracy theory. I'm familiar with the idea.
Yeah, like that's a conspiracy theory, but he's saying it wasn't racist to worry about that. And it's like, well, actually, that conspiracy theory is racist.
Well, I mean, here's where it gets complicated because I'm sure these two stooges are going to bring up a very select set of emails from the very beginning of the pandemic between a bunch of virologists and Tony Fauci. Scientists did consider this as a very early initial theory. Like they looked at the genetic sequence of the thing and were like, I'm kind of concerned about, this specific area. Like this is suspicious for possible bioengineering. But then what they did was sat down and they analyzed it over a week or two and was like, actually, you know what? Those suspicions were unfounded. Our actual scientific analysis of this shows that that's very likely not the case. So what happened was the scientific method happened. They had an idea. They did some testing to see if their idea was correct or not, and it was wrong, so they changed the take. And because the scientists had the nerve to consider a lab leak as a possibility early on, that made it true as a starting point from there on out for people who can't understand what the scientific method is. So they'll bring that up. I'm pretty sure they're going to bring that up. As to how people thought about it coming from a laboratory in the first place. We'll see.
At the origins of this pandemic, ultimately, because we need to figure out how not to do this sort of thing again if we are in any way culpable for the emergence of this virus. So I mean, that's where I've always been. It's not that I have not been interested. It's just it's only that's something like this moment where I feel like, all right, this is a very important project to drill down on this. Obviously, you both were much more interested earlier because you've written a book on this topic. But I'm wondering if my initial disinclination
let them talk
to drill down on the origin story seems questionable to you.
Like me and HK are perfectly fine to just make fun of the annoying way in which Sam Harris talks. But Sam, don't you know we have a PhD candidate in the field of fucking biology on the show who would like to say something about what your guests are saying? Can we just move it along a little bit here, Sam? For fuck's sake. We went through all the trouble to have Marcus on. We watched Scientology TV while we waited for him to get here. Sam, for fuck's sake, we could have just watched the first fucking 10 minutes of this instead of Scientology TV.
Yeah, I wouldn't have missed anything. What the fuck, man? Just that's just rude to your guests, regardless of who they are. Let them talk. They're there. You wanted them there. They're guests in your digital home. Let them be.
It seemed politically inflammatory initially, and it also seemed like when the first job is to design vaccines, it didn't seem quite relevant to know the origin. Is there something that I was missing there?
So, Sam, I actually started on the same foot as you. So I was more interested in how the virus was causing disease in people before I read that it was not mutating much. And that's when the alarm went off that this might have come from a lab to me. So I was actually more interested in finding a way to treat the disease rather than to find out where it came from. But to the question of which is
Correct
more
me if I'm wrong,
important,
but
I think that both
the
have to be
the
investigated
SARS-CoV-2
parallel,
virus
because if you wait too long,
does mutate a lot.
Yeah, well, it does mutate a lot. There was about a year of time where we didn't have there's a year of time where we didn't have vaccines, so there's no like big time immune pressure that was being exerted on the virus for the virus to like have mutations selected. Really, what we saw over the first year of the pandemic was like a mutation here, a mutation there. That gave the virus some advantages. It made it more fit, made it better able to transmit and spread. But then once vaccines entered the ball game, then the virus is now locked in this like evolutionary battle between like the immune system and all the immunity that vaccines and prior infections had built up. So then you started to see the rates of mutations really pick up. Then you got the variants. We started to see variants after the vaccine rollout began. Right, there's the alpha variant, which is a couple of mutations, but then we got like Delta, and then we got Omicron. Like the rate of mutations really picked up once we entered the vaccine era.
I'm really glad we stopped naming them after cities or whatever. That was bad when we were naming them after cities.
Oh yeah, because I mean that goes right back to the whole. It's racist to say it came from here. When you name a variant after a city, then you're blaming the people for it. That was kind of weird. So I'm glad we got to the Greek letters, but we also have deviated from that separate conversation. And
if I'm not mistaken, it isn't so much that like the vaccines or your immunity causes a virus to mutate. It's that a mutation is more likely to be what spreads than the OG virus if you have built up immunity through vaccines to the OG virus. Am I close?
It's an exercise in natural selection, basically. So without vaccines, your immune system is entirely naive. Like it's never encountered the virus before, and the virus isn't having mutations show up that help it evade immunity because there's no prior immunity to evade. But once people are vaccinated, or if they had gotten sick with it before, then they likely have antibodies against the virus. So what that does is you get selection for mutations in the virus that allow it to evade those antibodies. And those are the viruses that live to see another day and continue to spread, and those become variants. More broadly speaking, it's people who are immune compromised who can't get rid of the virus from their body. Those are the people who are like walking variant factories. Right? They've done some research on some of these people, and they're sick for like a year plus, and all of the mutations you see in the contemporary variants you see in those people, and they're infectious the entire time. So it's like those people who can't get rid of the virus from their damn body have an incomplete immune response, just enough of a response to put pressure on the virus to mutate, but not enough to actually get rid of it. So you get that hyperbolic time chamber, so to speak, going on in people without an immune system. And that's the leading theory as to how variants show up in the first place. So it's all about that evading the immune system, right? That's when mutations really started to pick up. There are a couple of mutations that just occurred naturally by random chance that weren't in that like lens of evading the immune system. But that was just because those mutations made the virus either more fit, increased the viral load, like it had a tangible benefit for the virus.
It will become impossible to find the origin of the outbreak.
Right. Yeah. That honestly, I had not thought about that part of it, that you sort of lose your connection to the facts if you're not really looking as much as you can look, as early as you can look. Before we jump in, and this really is a fascinating topic, which sheds a lot of light.
Before we jump in, it's only been 8.5 minutes.
A fair amount of societal dysfunction. I mean, we're going to talk about the origins of COVID, but in the background and perhaps explicitly, we're also talking about the political corruption of science and a fundamental lack of transparency on the part of public health officials, and attendant failures of cooperation.
Dude, he's a stone's throw from Fauci lied, people died.
Your relevant backgrounds here. Let's start with you, Matt.
You did that in the intro. Stop.
With one another, though we have not yet met scandalously. I've read several of your books, and I will have introduced you both properly at the beginning here in the intro. But give me your potted bio, Matt.
Will do. Yeah.
Even though you've already been introduced
1.5 times.
Can
actually.
you introduce yourself?
My bio is that I'm an evolutionary biologist by training. I did a DPhil at Oxford in the behavior of birds a very long time ago. I then became a journalist.
Not virology.
Became a book writer, an author, non-fiction author, and various other things I did. Ended up in the UK Parliament for 9 years, in the House of Lords, not in the House of Commons. And the common theme of my career is a fascination with science and with evolutionary biology in particular. So actually coming to this topic, I was especially interested in the story of the bats right from the start, or at least whatever other species it was going to turn out to be. But it very quickly became clear that all these SARS-like viruses are basically found in one genus of bats, the horseshoe bats. And it was writing about that that got me into this topic. I very quickly learned that I could rule out a lab leak as plausible on the basis of arguments that were being put in what seemed to be authoritative scientific papers. I then later came to question that and thought that those papers were premature. And that's how I got more and more intrigued. And it was Alina.
They're also like absolutely like straw manning the consensus position. The consensus position, I kept reading it over and over again. It's like the strongest evidence for this is that it came from this wet market. This is where we think it came from. We cannot rule out other places that this originated. They all said that shit.
Yeah, leading up to summer of last year, that was the scientific consensus. Is like, we're still considering it. We're not going to rule it out. The data from summer of last year, I think, actually do pretty concretely rule it out. Because actually, any lab leak scenario, in spite of those data, we'll talk about the stuff later. But any lab leak scenario from this point onwards is comically absurd to the point of it being like a comedy skit. Like, so many ridiculous things would have had to happen with people unknowingly, but also knowingly being sick with a COVID or a progenitor to the virus, and then doing what one person wouldn't ever think to do, to go to the seafood market and spit on everybody. Like, what the fuck? None of that makes any sense at all, but we'll get there later.
Work really that tipped me over the edge.
Alina?
So I've been working in labs for about 14 years. I have a background in biochemistry, medical genetics, genetic engineering, and now gene therapy. So I am a scientist at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. And I'd say that the common theme in my research, in my scientific life, is thinking about how to re-engineer human cells for therapeutic purposes, and now thinking about how viruses interact with their host, with human cells.
Wonderful. Well, so you are just the people I want to talk to on this topic. And as Chancellor...
no, they're not.
So...
I mean, they're the ones he wants to talk to, because he wants the controversy.
And
I mean, yes, but also no, because he's going to get flack from this, I'm sure.
Alleging happened or may have happened. And maybe before we're going to track through this, the various arguments for and against the thesis, but you might just say how your thinking may have evolved in the meantime. I mean, have you become more convinced or less convinced of any particular claim?
Yeah, shall I?
I'm going to say more convinced.
I was commissioned by the Wall Street Journal to write an article called "The Bats Behind the Pandemic" in, I think it was April or May of 2020, and
the robust virology outfit known as the Wall Street Journal.
This virus seems to have come from bats, and that they had already found a very similar relative, but I didn't know where or when. And the more I dug into the topic, the more I began to question the received wisdom at the time, which I had been conveying to other people, that you could rule out a lab origin. And then I came across a paper by Alina and two of her colleagues, which said that this virus had experienced no burst of rapid evolutionary change on first entering the human species in 2019, which is surprising because the original SARS had shown that, and most viruses do that. They have to evolve pretty fast to suit the new host. And she also tipped me off.
No, that's not necessarily true.
Now ruled out that it began in the market. George Gao, the head of the Centers for Disease Control in Beijing, had announced that he thought the market was a super spreader event, not a origin event.
They've revised that take.
That's when I started getting intrigued. And Alina was the first scientist I talked to who said, look, it's an open question. We don't know if it came out of a lab. We don't know if it came out of a market. I got more and more interested in it. I followed her work and other work more and more closely, dug as deeply as I could. And eventually I said to her, could we collaborate on a book? Because although I know quite a lot about genomics, I've written several books on the topic, I'm basically a writer, not a scientist, and I would need to collaborate with somebody who understood the science. We both, I think, thought, and Alina can confirm this, at the start, that it could go either way. That we would probably find out while we were writing the book what the answer was.
I mean, that's how you learn. HK, did you know that that's how you learn about things in science? Is you read a book?
You write a book or you read a book?
No. Don't be silly, HK. You read a book.
Yeah, it's that's what book reviews, right? That's what peer review is. Yeah, when New York Times calls your book a bestseller, that's peer review, actually.
We were wrong about that, by the way. We still don't know 3 years later. But we would probably find out that it was either something to do with that seafood market or something to do with that laboratory in Wuhan. And so
such insight.
Roughly equal quantities of text in the book to each argument. But I think by the end, we were both leaning towards the lab. And then a couple of other things happened just as we were about to publish. A document dropped, which we can describe later, which I think tipped us both into the view that the lab was now more likely than the market.
What has been your experience touching this topic, trying to publish on it and publishing, in fact, at a certain point? And has there been a fraught adventure in publishing? And I know you've testified.
We're leaning towards believing a global conspiracy
Just
is
what manner of
an interesting stance.
Has this been, and how has that political environment around this
I guess it's not global. It's just one government.
Yeah, well, we've met all sorts of barriers. This was described as a conspiracy theory that it could have come out of the lab very early on. And it was
it still is.
Well,
it's literally a conspiracy. Whether it's true or not, it's literally a conspiracy theory.
Right. Like MK Ultra, before people found out that it was true, was a conspiracy theory because that's literally what it was. Like, if this would have turned out to be true, it still would have been, it's now it's just a conspiracy. You just take the word theory off the end.
Right. Because if a conspiracy theory becomes true, you have a body of evidence and facts to support that. So now you just say people conspired to do this thing.
That's right.
Altogether on places like Facebook. Luckily on Twitter, it wasn't. You could still speculate and share information on Twitter. So in the social media space, it wasn't easy. That changed a bit in 2021. The world got a bit more open-minded. In terms of the media, we found certain newspapers and broadcast outlets were very interested in talking about this topic and thought it was an interesting one. Others,
Epoch Times,
CNN and the BBC, just wouldn't talk about our book at all, for example.
Newsmax.
Is that still the case?
Yes, basically, as far as I know, it is, I think. I think you have been on CNN, Alina, once, but only a long time ago. So, and I've not been. Well, there was one very, very obscure BBC program had us on before they realized how unfashionable we were.
I don't think I've been on CNN. I think they canceled last minute also. And I've seen that a lot of.
I don't think that it's that they're unfashionable. I think it's that what they're saying is not backed up by evidence. So it is the responsible thing for a news outlet to not have them on.
Oh, unequivocally. But think of all the missed clicks and ad revenue and attention. That's more important than scientifically correct information these days.
And like these seem like the kind of people that know better than to go on like InfoWars or Natural News or whatever. Their grift, it seems like their grift kind of relies on the fact that they're not going on outlets like the Stu Peters show or
yeah, and
Michaela Peterson's podcast. I don't know. These people have been on fucking Michaela Peterson's show. That's where we start to hit that gray area when we get to Michaela and Jordan.
Right. And that's what Matt Ridley contributes to this not so dynamic duo, is that knowledge that like you stay out of the incredibly fringe spaces and you try and launder those credentials as hard as you can. Like it's kind of disgusting. I think at some point, if Alina becomes not so useful for Matt, he'll dump her at a moment's notice and move on to the next. And Alina will be left high and dry, unhireable, untouchable in academia. Like she'll be nothing. and she lacks that media savvy. And you'll start seeing her pop up in those spaces if Matt Ridley ever distances himself from her.
Right, because there's no version of why I left the left for the other side.
Exactly.
She'll start a podcast though.
That is going to be a podcast that I think is going to garner very few listeners. I think there are people in that space that actually do it better than her. I mean, literally the paid Chinese dissident who is paid by Steve Bannon would do a better job. Like straight up, she's more riveting. She gets to the point quicker. Like it just is. If we're getting into content brain for a second, like Li Meng Yan is 10 times the content that Alina Chan ever would be. Like, holy shit. She's got Bannon money. That the production value would be sky high.
To be fair, Roger Stone doesn't know how to use Steve Bannon's phone system, and I think that's why Steve Bannon fired him.
Want to interview us on the book. And then a few days right before, they would say, oh, we can't touch this topic. Our scientific editor is against it, that kind of thing. So there has been, I think, some self-censorship on this on the part of news reporters on this topic.
Yeah, and also it's worth mentioning that we've had a lot of encouragement from scientists privately.
Mm-hmm.
An awful lot of people are saying to us,
Oh, sure you do.
Everyone is telling us privately that we're doing great and we're right. They're just not willing to say it publicly.
This is an ongoing theme on the intellectual dollar tree. Do you remember when Sam Harris was saying that all these people, these scientists that you would know were calling him and saying that they totally agree with the bell curve guy, but they just couldn't ever. They just couldn't ever. It's an ongoing theme. You have to do this. It has to be like I'm getting a call from the fucking Xenu that's telling me like it doesn't matter. You just insert anything there. It's like other people agree with me. It's like the I have a girlfriend in Canada thing. You can't meet her.
Yep. A lot of people tell me that I'm smart. They're just not willing to say that publicly. My
girlfriend goes to another school. No, I can't introduce you. Her friends wouldn't like my friends. I'm sorry. She's too pretty for all of you.
My dad owns Blizzard and he could get you banned from this game.
It's actually my dad's friend.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, now they can say that because they're friends with Elon. My friend runs Twitter. He'll get you banned now. How's that for censorship?
Above the parapet. And when I pressed, for example, the Royal Society in London and also the Academy of Medical Sciences to hold a debate on the origin of a pandemic that's killing north of 10 million people.
Science isn't done through debate.
These people have podcast brain.
Yeah, like literally, we don't sit around the conference room and be like, all right, let's debate the mitochondria today. Like that's not how this shit works. Is it not the powerhouse?
Theory is true.
Right, like what? There's no insights that we arrive at through pure interlocution between each other. Like we do experiments. We actually have to gather harder data than just our daily opinings after we've done crack cocaine and showed up on fucking Alex Jones. Like that. None of that is how science works, right? We actually have data to talk about. We have experiments that we run.
The show actually isn't about Mike Lindell.
Yeah, sometimes we might get confused, but in reality, we're not actually talking about Mike Pillow.
And we found something similar in the US that the question of sort of opening it up to a proper conversation is just not acceptable within conventional science. And this
a proper conversation is one in which someone takes this guy seriously. That's what he means, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want the scientific community to take you seriously, just have the evidence on your side.
Or just yell "debate me, bro" at like some lady who works in a chemistry lab somewhere. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's the thing.
It's really not hard. Just have evidence that's on your side, and the scientific community will agree with you.
Well, and like there is a built-in mechanism for that. It's called publication. You can get your evidence together in a nice wrapped-up bundle and let other people look at it. And if you have a coherent argument and you didn't like cheat or make anything up, then they'll publish it and everybody can see it and people will see how much of a galaxy brain you are. that there's a mechanism so people can do exactly that and figure out that you're poggers like that. That's just how this works.
And if there's something missing from what you're doing, they might even tell you. They'd be like, "Hey, you might want to look into this real quick just to make sure that everything's on the up and up here." But that's what they don't want.
Yeah. Or sometimes, you can cheat and make things up and it'll still get published. But hopefully that gets found out and you lose all your credibility. And if you're Andrew Wakefield, you lose your medical license.
Oh, definitely. Like, peer review is not without its flaws, but at the very least, if you're not willing to go through the process, that's a massive red flag before you have said anything about your pet theory. If you're not willing to let other people look at it, then you're already, that's strike one. Like, you're not here in good faith.
But it's mine. You can't have it.
But that
Generally thinks it came from a lab. If you look at opinion polling and based on anecdotal conversations I have with people, an awful lot of people think, yeah, of course it came out of that lab. Whereas the scientific...
But that's not data.
Do any of these people have a name? Or is it just your girlfriend that I can't meet?
Yes, the unfalsifiable, unimpeachable Congress and the House of Lords that we're never going to see, actually, because, it's never in session.
But, like, this isn't even like, it's not even like he's saying, well, most people believe this, therefore it's true. He's saying most people privately tell me that they believe this, therefore it's true. They're just not willing to say it publicly.
Well, then maybe they should grow a fucking pair.
It's like
the argument from Populum Occulta.
No, it's the argument from unknowable authority.
I mean, it's both.
It's the hidden popular belief.
Remember when Brett? Oh, go ahead, Marcus.
No. I mean, it's just unimaginable to me that, like, people lack so much critical thinking that it's like, okay, who are the people? Like, nobody asked the questions that you two just asked. Like, who are these people? Can we talk to them? Where are they? Show me the people. And I mean, it never happens.
Nobody even asked the name of the guy who takes care of Brett's friend's fish tank or whoever it was. Do you remember that anecdote? What the fuck did that? Like, what's your friend's name? Do they have a fish tank business? They don't have a fish tank? Well, they're fucking cleaning a fish tank without a license. You, sir, are now a party to a crime.
Going to report you rapscallions out here cleaning fish tanks without the proper regulatory documents.
Like, this is like this is the most unrigorous shit in the world. Like, if you said, hey, somebody told me this, I'd be like, who? And I like you. But I'd still be like, well, who?
Right. Just show me the people. I want to talk to them. Like, for as much as these people scream about nobody's debating me, they have a magical, unreachable crowd of people hyping them up at all times, and we can't debate them. We can't talk to those people. They're not actually here for debate then if we can't talk to your supporters who are doing it in private.
And the other thing is, like, if they had like a debate at like some kind of academic institution or whatever, if he said, oh, a friend of mine told me this on condition of anonymity, and that's how I know this, the people in the audience would laugh at them.
Yeah, that's when the tomatoes start coming out. Like, right. You get that shit chucked at you and you get hooked off stage left with a cane.
Establishment likes to say that the vast majority of scientists think it did.
Dear FDA, I'd like you to approve my drug. I gave it to 1,000 people who all said it worked great. No, you can't see them.
They live in Canada. You'll never meet them.
If they think that, and they
you have no jurisdiction there.
We're wrong on this topic. Then they ought to be all the more willing to come out and debate it and knock down the theory that it came out.
They did that. They published 2 papers, and dipshits like you ignore it.
We haven't been able to have a very open, wide-ranging conversation in much of the media about this over the last 2 or 3 years.
And not for nothing, these people, they don't want someone to just be like, dude, you're a crank. Because eventually, if they engage in like debates on stages in places, they're going to come across somebody, maybe another layperson. Maybe like a, they'll be like, oh, they'll just come across some other layperson who's been like looking into this, and they're like, dude, I think you're a crank. And then they're going to be like, well, what is your blah, blah, blah? And it's like, they don't want that.
Yeah, of course they don't want that.
They want to
They'll
say that
never
no one
want
will
that.
debate them, and then they want to block you on Twitter.
Yeah, it's the constant posturing is academic heterodoxy. You can't be heterodox if you actually come to some sort of compromise or polite agreement with the system, the institution. If you agree with them, you're now one of them.
Right, and that's its own kind of orthodoxy, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole heterodox becomes the orthodox. The thesis, antithesis, synthesis, same shit, different application. Like that's you can't become part of the system if you want to keep up the grift. It's not very profitable to be a crusty old professor.
So I don't think they're gonna they're not. I think they're just gonna. This is just gonna be like a grievance fest. I don't think we're even gonna. And we're only like 18 or 17 minutes into this, but I think this is just gonna be a grievance fest. I don't think that we're gonna get like any sort of. They're not gonna like try to make the case that they're pretending that they're trying to make. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean that's
Dave,
what's
did you
supposed to be
come
in
here
the
for
book.
evidence?
No, I came here for the grievance fest. I just feel like we're wasting Marcus's time with this.
Hey, no, look, I spent all day on stream yesterday yelling at grievance fests, so I'm also here for the grievance fest. Let's roll. Let's bang. Let's do this.
Well, good. I gotta get up and go to the bathroom, so I'm gonna let this roll, and you guys can talk over it and over each other. I'll be right back.
Well, one of
Sounds
the
good.
things we've seen as well over the last 2 years is that a lot of emails have been obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, showing that virologists who publicly said, of course, it came from an animal at that market, privately in their emails, they were worrying whether this virus had been engineered in the Wuhan lab.
Okay, well, I want us to explore the nature of
And
the
that's exactly what you talked about before, where, yes, they worried about it in the very beginning and then ruled it out.
the origins of the virus
Right.
and to worry that it could have leaked out of a lab. I
I mean, that's how predictable these people are. It's a dialogue tree, and you can follow it.
more fully. It's first of all, there's been a rich history of security breaches at labs and leaks of dangerous pathogens, even from labs with higher security than the Wuhan Institute of Virology has.
Has there been?
So we know we're bad at this, containing.
What lab leaks have there been?
There was a Russian lab leak in like the 70s, 80s that caused a flu pandemic, but what he won't tell you is that security has gotten better since like the 70s and the 80s, number one. And number two, there is no BSL level that's higher than what they had at Wuhan because it's BSL 4. That's the highest level possible.
Not so widely respected at the moment. Well, maybe let's just touch the general question now.
So when I walked away, they talked about emails, and I've come up with this thing called the email fallacy. As soon as like any emails from anything get released, everybody assumes there's something in there. There's some kind of like nefarious activity. The emails could be about nothing, but now like when emails get dumped or emails get like released, people are just like, oh, there's emails, and it's like, oh shit, emails.
I mean, that's literally the plot of Pizzagate.
Right. Yeah.
Like there were emails about like, hey, I'm going to get some pizza. What do you want?
But I
And the
think
guy's like, oh, can you get pepperoni on mine? And people were saying it was like a child sex trafficking ring.
right. But I think I think the same thing probably happened with Fauci's emails when they came out. I think there's little to nothing in there, and people just were like, oh, the emails got released. Have you read them?
Yeah, if you read them, you saw the scientific method. I actually read them. Believe it or not, I actually read the release from Judicial Watch. It was 70. I read. It was actually 300 plus pages of emails. There was very little in there. The only thing that I ever had a grievance about in his emails was the fact that the dude was answering fan mail instead of like talking to other scientists. There was a bunch of emails. Dude, people were literally sending Fauci emails like, oh my God, you brave medical warrior. I love you. You're my favorite. And he would respond to every one of those being like, oh, thank you so much for your kind words. I'm now God's bravest warrior because you sent me this email. Thank you. I appreciate it. Like, He has such a massive ego. He responded to every single iota of fan mail. It's like, dog, you got something better to be doing. Can you stop with the fan mail? You can put that in a pile and deal with it when this isn't hitting the fucking fan right now, okay?
Or delegate, my God. Be like, oh, thanks for emailing Dr. Fauci. This is someone from his office, blah, blah, blah. Thanks for the kind words. Boom.
Yeah, or automate it.
Control V that shit. The same response, everyone.
Exactly. People aren't going to share their Fauci fan mail with each other.
I'm really impressed that you read all that. I don't even read my own emails.
Well, we see, I knew from like the Hillary saga that like if Judicial Watch is getting involved, they're gonna clip chimp the fuck out of those emails. Like they're gonna try and warp and distort everything. So I was like, all right, time to inoculate myself with the inner workings of a 78-year-old Italian man's day job. Like, okay, here we go. And so I read it and I was like, okay, this is boring.
The scientific community, in particular, be so coddling of Chinese political sensitivities on this topic. I mean, I get why the Chinese don't want to admit or don't want to understand that they, through negligence, have birthed a global pandemic. If in
Not the negligence you think, Sam.
And the other thing is, what if that's like what didn't happen? So what would be the value in understanding it if that's what didn't happen?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know, like, what would be the difference in Sam's mind of a world where the lab leak were true and a world where the market origin were true?
Yeah, it wouldn't make a difference to him, and it's not going to make a difference to right-wingers. They're still not going to get vaccines and wear masks, which makes this discussion remarkably unproductive in the broader sense of things.
we could argue it's negligence either way, whether it's a wet market or a lab leak. But why would the Western press and the Western scientific community be so eager to protect their self-concept on this point?
They're not. They're manufacturing consent.
I'll
Sure.
chip in.
So I'll say first that when I first started wondering about where this pandemic had come from,
Okay, she's going to say they're protecting Fauci's funding stream and funding for big virology. Watch.
Not just the US, but many other countries across Asia and Europe with labs in China to do quite risky virus work that might have led to this pandemic. So here, it's not just whether Western scientists afraid of, provoking China. It's really a question of, are they also complicit in the origin of COVID-19? And over the last few years, we've seen again and again a lot of support within the US for exactly that type of dangerous virus research that's commonly known now as gain-of-function research. So if the pandemic did start from a lab in Wuhan, it is not just a Chinese government issue. It is actually an issue that affects multiple countries, many countries who have all supported and endorsed and engaged in this work. And the US is a big funder of it. So they would have almost equal responsibility, I think, in my eyes.
Okay, so it's not just China and its political sensitivities. If, in fact, this is the result of laboratory negligence, there's a lot of blame to spread around, and we'll get there. So to start,
just to chip in there, Sam, if I may, just to amplify one of the points. It is the case that Western virology feels worried that its entire research program, indeed the whole of biotechnology, might lose its funding, might lose its social license if a major...
There you go.
My
you
God,
fucking called it.
That's how predictable these people are.
He was like, I'm sorry, the conspiracy that was just posited was not far-reaching and outrageous enough. So what I have to do is up the ante just a little bit. I'm sorry, Sam. Oh, Sam, who came up through the skeptic community.
Yeah. But like like going back to what I said, like what would be different about the world? Like what would be different about this situation if they're wrong? They're saying like everything matches how I think the world would be behaving if I'm right. And it's like, okay, well, how would people be behaving? What would it look like if you're wrong? And they never think about that. And they never think about like, oh, all of these behaviors that I'm attributing to malice are actually explained by just me being wrong, too.
And you have a point. The cruelty, the malice is the point. Like they want to lash out at the scientific community, scientists, virologists, big virology, Fauci for being the one who pushed the button that said give them $1 gazillion for bioweapons in China. Like they have these perceived slights that they feel they have been victimized by because they had to put on a mask and get a vaccine. It's that behavior that you're alluding to, HK. Like, regardless of which one of these is true or not, that doesn't change the fact that you still need to like not get sick with the fucking virus and get a vaccine and put on a mask. So it's like they're more interested in like lashing out and taking revenge rather than praxis, rather than dealing with the problem. They don't want to be inconvenienced by things like that because they feel it's all unnecessary because the scientists did it. Blame them, make them feel an inconvenience instead of me.
And not for nothing, if you believe that this thing was like somehow genetically engineered to be more contagious, wouldn't you be a little more anxious for that fucking vaccine? Like,
and maybe a good
That's
mask
how they
too.
get the microchip in you, Dave.
oh shit. That's all right. Somebody burned down the 5G tower, so they can't even activate the microchip.
I mean, like, really, they don't need a microchip. I carry this thing around with me.
But can
everywhere.
Can it activate the nanobots inside of you?
Probably.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yeah, I'm sure Bill Gates could connect with Apple, make that happen.
Laboratory. And, I share that concern.
Oh, this has Outlook on it. Don't worry.
Biotech.
Bill Gates has his
vaccine,
fingers
pro
in there.
genetic engineering of crops and in medicine as well. And it would be a terrible pity if, as a result of this, the world said, right, we don't want to have anything to do with biotechnology ever again.
Yeah.
It's a disaster.
But it's concern
I
trolling.
think truth is more
Yep.
important than consequence. And actually,
Why would anyone
science would be
ever
better
say
off
that?
Saying, no, let's find
What-
out. And if this did go wrong,
What is this
let's learn
strange
lessons.
straw man he's building?
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
truth is more important than consequence. I don't care if I have to wear a mask or something. I want to know where it came from, and that's more important. He literally just said the opposite of what we just said was more important.
I think one could well wonder whether we want to have anything to do with gain of function research, which we'll talk about. I mean, this is something that I've touched on. this podcast
He's saying,
once before.
I would rather
My friend Rob
everyone
Reed
die
did a special
to prove me
episode
right.
on this.
Literally.
than admit that I'm wrong.
So Sam just there was like, well, we're going to go back here, actually. If that's okay.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think one could well wonder whether we want to have anything to do with gain of function research, which we'll talk about. I mean, this is something that I've touched on this podcast once before. My friend Rob Reed did a special episode on this research. So that part is especially worth worrying about, in my view, but we'll get there. So let's take it from the top here. What is the best argument for the natural origins of this virus? I mean, if memory serves, at the beginning, and perhaps this is still the case, there was evidence that it started spreading from the wet market, whatever its initial origins might have been. You just referred to it as possibly a super spreader event. So there was a pattern of spread with the wet market as its epicenter. And I forget what it was. It was something like 27 first cases that were detected there.
That's not a super spreader event, but whatever. 27 seems like a low number for a market.
Of this
Right.
Right.
pandemic.
Well, maybe I can chip in on.
I'm going to spoil. Actually, do you want me to spoil what they're going to say? Because I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
This is like
Okay,
me
so what-
watching a fucking chemtrails video. I'm like, oh, are they going to say this? Like, we have whole bingo cards based on the idea that we already know what the motherfuckers we talk about on here are going to say.
Dude, honestly, I probably should have made one before this. We all could have played along. Fuck. That's actually a really good idea. Now I'm kind of regretting that I didn't do that.
We have an IDW bingo card that people can play. We've already got like a bunch of the IDW things. If you go ! IDW in the chat, you can get a bingo card for the IDW. And we've already probably hit some of them. It's like I'm the aggrieved scientist, all those kind of themes.
Yeah.
But what's
you
he going to
probably
say?
hit they're Matt and Alina are going to basically say the Chinese authorities, with respect to the cases in the market, did sampling bias and they didn't look for cases literally everywhere, which is not true because the only documented cases that were ever happening in the early time frame of the pandemic were in Wuhan and had ties to the market. The longer things went on, you got more cases that were not directly linked to the market, but very close in geographical space to the market. It radiates outward from the market like a bullseye. But what these two are going to say is that, they did sampling bias and they didn't test literally everybody everywhere once they found one case. So they can't know for sure that the market was the original source. And it was just a super spreader, which you already addressed that last part, Dave. 27 people is not a super spreader. They actually did the legwork. The Huanan seafood market has the least amount of social media check-ins in any other place in Wuhan. Like they actually went
Like any,
on the
I mean,
Chinese
not of
social
any
media.
other, but you mean like of any market, like similar square footage size or whatever.
I mean, market, mall, gathering stadium, like
it's
public gathering space, place where somebody could check in on Instagram or Twitter.
Right,
The
it's not-
Huanan seafood market is not trafficked highly at all.
Right. It's not. It's certainly not. Yeah, I was reading that. It's not. It certainly was not the most crowded market. It might have been like the least crowded market.
Yeah, exactly. There are other markets elsewhere in China that are much more crowded than this one. But even in like Wuhan, there's way bigger public spaces where there are way more people than this.
Well, I guess that's, you take the small victory there where you can get it, right? Because like if it would have been in a much more crowded place, things might have unraveled more quickly.
Exactly.
In the case of SARS in 2003, there was a very clear link to markets, food handlers, and that kind of thing. So when this one cropped up, and it's a very, very similar virus, it's very closely related to SARS, and it was first noticed in and around a food market, it seemed to be very much the same story. And that remains a possibility. There were mammals on sale in that market, not nearly as many as you would find in southern China. This is an area of China where you don't have the same habit of buying live animals in markets to the same degree. But there were mammals on sale in that market, and people did seem to get infected in that market. And the geographical proximity of the outbreak to a major food market does look a bit like SARS in 2003. The problem was they never found an infected animal, whereas they easily found them in the case of SARS.
Yeah, because the Chinese authorities pulled them from the market, so people didn't get sick.
In the market, it was on things like doorknobs, countertops, and in the sewage.
Right. You know what? Yeah. It's easy. It's pretty easy to conflate things that might be done in the immediate like clamoring about the virus. It might be easy to conflate that with a cover up.
Right. I mean, it's one thing, like what I tell people the Chinese authorities should have done is they should have taken the animals out of the market like they did, but like keep them so the global scientific community could go test them, or so that the Chinese CDC could test them to figure that out. Like take the animals away so people don't get sick, and then hook your science homies up with the personal protective equipment, have them swab the animals, collect samples from the animals, at least have them without the animals being in the market. Like that's all they had to do. I don't think if they did that latter part, that's the stuff they're not sharing. But at the very least, if we're talking public health, they had SARS in 2003. They know better than to let those animals stay in the market because they don't know how many are sick and how long people have been getting sick from the animals. So they're going to say, just pull them, just yank those things out.
Yeah. Like I said, but a thing that you would do to save lives could be easily just be fucking spun as a cover up. Well, where are the animals, right? Or they killed them because they fucking got rid of them because they were giving everybody this fucking new disease. Oh, they're covering it up. It's like, well, I mean, you got to do it. I don't know. I'm not going to second guess everybody's decision in a crisis, because that's what they were looking at, like a crisis. So
yeah, I mean, life is more valuable than a pedantry at that point in time. Like you want to keep people alive, and if a weird respiratory illnesses like the one you had 17 plus years ago starts cropping up, you're going to be more concerned about your people rather than the fucking raccoon dog in a cage.
It's so crazy.
The human version of the virus being spread around by people. So yeah, it remains a possibility that this was very much like SARS. It started in that market, and that somebody was selling bamboo rats, which had been kept in a cave where bats had been defecating on them, or something like that. And yes, we would expect something like that to happen every now and then, because we know that these viruses are circulating in wild bats, and people are coming into contact with them in the wild.
It actually happens way more frequently, 70,000 times a year.
Possible progenitor virus found in any animal in the market?
Yes.
They weren't tested.
Right,
So I think that there are many lessons to be learned from how this pandemic was traced, in terms of how the local investigators in Wuhan tried to find the source of the virus. So what had happened was there were hospitals in Wuhan, in the middle of Wuhan, and they were seeing cases of unexplained pneumonia. So they didn't know what was infecting these people. And then doctors started realizing that they were seeing some cases from this market, from this seafood market that sold some number of live animals. So they called in investigators, and then those investigators thought maybe it's SARS-1 happening again. And at that time, they were not, so sure about human-to-human transmission yet. So what they did was they looked at the animals in the market or supply chain. They went straight to the market, and they wrote all this down in their notes, in their publications in early 2020. They said, we are just going to look at the market. We're going to look at the hospitals near the market.
There it
and
is.
We're going to look in the neighborhood of the market. So they completely focused their search on people with either links to the market, or if they had no links to the market.
How dare you focus your search for information about this virus in the place where this virus is?
Heresy! How dare you? Like,
Yep, you called it again.
Yep, you. But that's like me knowing what Madison Star Moon's going to say, right? It's like sort of the same
Right.
thing. Me being
yeah, I
able
mean, it's not an achievement. It's not an achievement. I will admit that much.
us being able to predict what some of the people at the Shasta County Board of Supervisors who we've seen 50 times walk up there. Yeah, it's just you get to the bottom of a certain rabbit hole and you just know everything about it, and it's like, I guess, useful in a very narrow way.
The market, they had to live near the market.
Mhm.
So what this did was it led to this looking under the bright light, but not looking around in the dark kind of analogy, where they ended up confining their search prematurely to one hypothesis, such that if there had been earlier cases not linked to the market or living far away from the market, they would have been missed completely. So
Right.
in this sense, this led to this great unknown.
I don't think
that
that's
persists
true,
to
because
today.
those
Are there
people would have
earlier
gone to
cases?
the hospital.
Right? They would have noticed. They would have found some of them. Like,
Yeah, it's a very unhinged assumption that like you have a bunch of COVID sick people who don't know they have COVID and will refuse medical care. That's free and ubiquitous, actually. Especially considering Chinese people are known in China to go to the hospital for literally fucking everything, to the point where the government, when they released the zero COVID controls, the government of China had to be like, hey guys, can you please not go to the hospital if you only have just a fever? We know you want to, but please, for the love of God, don't. If you have just a sniffle, stay home. If you can't breathe, then we'll talk. Like, they will go to the hospital at the drop of a fucking hat if they feel like they need to. So they probably would have seen some of these earlier cases if they were
somewhere
far beyond the market.
Cases in the market? Are there cases in November, for example, that we don't know about? And if the Chinese government knows, they have not told us. They have not shared that information with us.
Just to restate that so people don't miss it. So what you're describing is a kind of selection bias. If you look for cases associated with the market, if you find anything, you're only going to find cases associated with the market. And then if you populate a map with those red dots, well, then you're going to have created a map that looks like the market was the epicenter of everything you found. But that could, in fact, be an artifact of just how you went looking for data. And obviously, it doesn't differentiate.
yeah, somebody in chat is saying, like, no matter how they would have investigated this, you'd have had conspiracy theorists like suggesting they were investigating it wrong. Because all you got to do is find. I mean, all they got to do is find a couple things that they believe to be anomalous, so that they can convince other people are anomalous, and boom, you got your manufactured doubt.
Yeah, it's the leveraging of scientific uncertainty. That's the name of the game when it comes to scientific issues. If scientists can't prove anything 100%, which is like most of the time, because that's not how philosophy works, then there's always room for doubt. It's that dumb Jim Carrey meme that says, so there's a chance, with him smiling from ear to ear. Like, that's what conspiracy theorists are doing right now.
This is great. We're never going to get through this in the hour and a half that we have allotted for the pod, but
Thesis from the
that'll give
market
people something to maybe look forward to on the post game.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And just to reiterate, at the time, people were not allowed to acknowledge that the virus was spreading from human to human.
Mhm.
There
Wait, what?
are anecdotes.
They were not allowed to acknowledge that?
from
What does that
Wuhan
mean?
Where doctors,
They're
for example,
they're
were
claiming
not allowed
Chinese
to wear
censorship.
masks because they were told that this virus is not spreading human to human. So to wear a mask would acknowledge that they could catch it from their patients. So in that sense,
What?
investigators
Don't doctors
were
wear
not
masks a
allowed
lot
to look
anyway?
For people who just
Sorry,
caught it.
maybe I just watch too much
So they were
TV and
looking
don't
for
spend
people
enough
who
time
had
being treated
exposure
by a
to
doctor. I don't know.
animals, had eaten at a restaurant where there was a live animal.
I mean, they do, but it was more that like
Well, that's an
the
amazing
doctors
change,
were
because
being silenced to some degree. Like there was kind of a little whistleblower action
Seems
going on
like
there in the very beginning.
Maneuver to want to put the bravest face possible on the top of this pandemic. But obviously the Chinese have changed their behavior rather markedly since. They've gone so far as to, I believe, weld people into their apartments, and their zero COVID policy to the eyes of the rest of the world has looked for now several years fairly berserk. So what are you actually saying about the political, social, cultural attitude of the Chinese in the first months of the pandemic?
I think we're
Does this
saying that
matter?
it flipped. It went from extraordinary complacency and false reassurance, the period up till roughly the middle of January 2020, when they were insisting there was no human-to-human transmission, telling the World Health Organization to spread that message, and also saying they had it under control and that they hadn't had any deaths for
that's what they were going to say. That's what America would say too, until like
2020, when probably local officials were desperate not to get into trouble with more powerful central bureaucrats and were giving out false reassurance about what was happening. Don't worry, we've closed the market. There's no human transmission. The cases that are in hospitals will either recover or die, and then it'll peter out. And then,
see, this is the only part that I would agree with them is a plausible conspiracy theory.
Sure.
Because we do have evidence that this happened, but none of that is evidence of a lab leak. It's evidence of people trying to cover up, not even like them knowingly try and cover it up, just people trying to like downplay something in the hopes that what they're saying was true, and it turned out it was not.
Right, in the hopes that it just goes away, which was, I guess, probably pretty fucking crazy thing to believe was likely based on what was going on, but fuck, I don't know.
Right. I mean, that's the Hanlon's razor, right? Like they're attributing it to malice when in reality, it's probably just either some degree of incompetence or forced compliance with higher authorities. If we're talking about, local administrators, but regardless, like that, they're just telling people nothing to be worried about. So yeah, if things change, then, oh shit, that's because there's new information or new directives. Like, that's how reasonable people work. When new information is now present, they change their take. Like, this is like a non-issue.
Coming into the hospitals.
And also, if the government knew that this virus was something that would spread around the world, if they had been working on it and manufacturing it in a lab to make it virulent and very contagious, then I believe that their response would have been different. Their response would have been immediately like, oh yeah, this is bad, you guys should prepare. Rather than saying, don't worry, we got it, it's nothing. Okay, actually it is bad.
It's killing people. And so they then reacted with very, very draconian lockdowns, as you say, that sort of worked to start with the
sort of, brother, they worked completely.
Version of COVID that was then spreading.
Like motherfuckers in Wuhan were riding roller coasters while everybody here was dying.
Later. But it worked. Wuhan did manage to stamp it out, but with extraordinary...
But still, after you died here, you could be put on a roller coaster.
Doors shut.
Still had that freedom.
And then
you'd be free to get your jalapeno poppers to take on the roller coaster with you.
Even that became untenable. They couldn't.
And then you're free to throw them up all over the people below you and get them sick too.
Spreading very rapidly. And they simply took the lid off. So there's been two changes in China, both of which have probably gone too far in the wrong direction.
Yeah, this is the first time I've thought about this, but it just suggests to me that, given the alacrity with which they started locking down in earnest, it suggests to me that those first months of denialism had to have been based on a sincere belief that there was no human-to-human transmission, or at least it wasn't going to get out of hand, because the moment that seemed to be the case, then they went fairly crazy in the other direction.
Well, I had to jump in here because
yes, and
in the first
that's evidence that it's not from a lab. It's not designed to do the thing they didn't expect it to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, if we're talking about bioweapons, there are so many better germs and things that you could use as a bioweapon that would be much better at infecting people than COVID. Like, if COVID was actually a bioweapon, it fucking sucks, and whoever made it should be fired. Like, straight up. You're exactly right. It would have been magnitudes worse if they were actually doing bioweapons testing and it got out.
Fairly
Wishful
crazy in the other
thinking.
direction.
Well, I had to jump in here
Yeah.
because actually, in the first week of January 2020, the sequence of the virus was being auctioned off to people who make diagnostics and to people who make vaccines. And we know that by, I think, January 4th, the vaccine production for this virus had jumped into high gear by one of these companies in China. So I think the people there were kind of operating on two truths at the same time. On the one hand, they had to accept what they were being told, that the virus was not spreading human to human. But on the other hand, they also have to manufacture, like wartime level amounts of vaccine for the virus.
What is a wartime level amount of vaccine?
I mean, she's probably saying like tens of millions just to try and get people vaccinated as soon as possible. But like, considering the clip at which like modern technology has made that process go that fast, people like Alina should know that's not a bad thing. Like the fact that the vaccine production started so quickly because they could sequence the virus's genetic code that quickly. And it's not the first time we've seen a virus like this. And there's already a giant body of research because of the last time we saw a virus like this. Like that's a good thing. The fact that she's saying that's a bad thing because there's some sort of conspiracy behind it means that she knows exactly what she's doing. And this is all her academic heterodoxy positioning that it's, big corporations did a plandemic to make vaccine money.
I don't think there was a unified.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I do remember that the Chinese government in those early months didn't say there is no human-to-human transmission. They said we have no evidence of human-to-human transmission.
Yeah, and those are two very different statements because, as the old adage says, absence of evidence does not mean evidence of absence, right? It could very well change. So I think they probably, if they had evidence of human-to-human transmission and they were reluctant to share it, that's a possibility, sure. If they were just trying to go the whole wishful thinking route and hoping that it would go away or not be that bad. But there may have come a point where they realized, well, we can't do anything about this now, so now we have to talk about it. Now we have to show people what we have. Or the other alternative is that they didn't have that full understanding until it already got out of control and enough people got sick for them to arrive at that understanding, and then they told everybody. So that's a point that's not worth debating.
Consensus, of course, across this entire huge country. But there were separate groups of people acting on different, almost acting as if they had to accept both truths. The truth that wasn't spreading to human, but also they had to prepare for a pandemic.
Mm. Yeah, well, the timeline of Chinese vaccine development, I know, is peculiar given what they claim to have known or not known, and I think it relates to the origin thesis. Maybe we should jump there now. What are the various anomalies that suggest a non-natural, that is, non-zoonotic, non-wet market origin for the virus? And I know these anomalies exist at various levels. There are molecular anomalies with respect to the virus itself, and then there are things like the timeline of Chinese response and vaccine development. And then this is probably the best place to talk about the various grant proposals that implicate Western involvement, EcoHealth Alliance, etc. But I don't know who wants to take this first, but walk me through the evidence for non-natural origin.
Well, so we're going to say fear and cleavage site, EcoHealth Alliance, sampled bats, inappropriate biosafety. Those are going to be the three high notes that they're going to hit. They're going to start doing molecular debate perversion about a feature of the virus's genetic code that has actually evolved very naturally and quite poorly in the current pandemic coronavirus. I'll get after every one of these as they come up. Let me just start with the fear and cleavage site, since that's where they're going first. It's a stretch of 12 letters in the virus's genetic code. It's a feature that makes the virus more able to get inside of cells. It makes it more infectious. The original claim, and this is what scientists like Fauci and others said was kind of odd about the virus, they saw this little tiny sequence in the genetic code and was like, wow, that's a little suspicious. Why would that be there? the reason why they thought that was suspicious is because there wasn't really at the time a very broad understanding of how this specific feature evolves in all sorts of other viruses, including coronaviruses. When people actually looked into it long after the pandemic started, surprise, it's actually somewhat common in coronaviruses. So the thing they're about to say, like, scientists had to have put that there. No, it has a very sloppy hallmark of evolution. If a scientist put it in there, they actually technically put it in backwards, so they fucked up on that. And then on top of that, the virus mutated around this feature when we got variants, implying the original version was not the most ideal version. So those 3 points is just going to blow that original molecular bullshit straight out of the water. Everything else at that point is just a big virology conspiracy theory. That's what they're going to say.
Through the evidence for non-natural origin.
Well, I think I could talk about this for hours. So there's quite a bit of evidence pointing towards a lab origin, although there's no key direct or definitive evidence for either natural or lab origin. So I'll try and be brief. So I think that the main key points for a lab origin is one, the location. So Wuhan is a place where even the top SARS virus researchers didn't believe that a outbreak would occur. So when the Wuhan Institute of Virology scientists who have spent like the last decade collecting these viruses first heard of this outbreak in her city, she said, could it have come from my lab? Because we never believed that, a SARS-like virus would...
she's going here first.
They in fact used their own city as a negative control. So a place where they would expect zero.
There have been other viruses in the same area that have broken out naturally. So I don't believe her that anyone ever said that.
Well, so she's talking about one of the chief scientists doing the work at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, Shi Shengli. When COVID first hit, she thought oh shit, did we do it? She the scientist at the Wuhan Institute of Virology herself was like, oh god, did we accidentally leak this? They tested / sequenced every single virus stock they ever had, and it didn't match COVID. Everything they had was way too evolutionarily distant from COVID. So they didn't have COVID or the progenitor to COVID in their freezers in the laboratory.
Did they check Building 7?
No, they didn't check Building 7.
There's a 7th building there in the Wuhan lab that it's underground.
Yeah, it's the secret basement where they're hiding all of the babies that Hillary abducted.
It's like what they got going on under the Getty. They do viruses. They do they do viruses. What else do they do? They do here.
They do Hunger Games down. They do Hunger Games down there. They do adoption, and they eat people.
But they also sequence viruses.
Yeah, that's where they store all of their bioweapons.
Zero people.
Yeah, this is just dumb. You can keep playing it.
Exposed to this type of bad coronavirus, and yet this was the location of arguably the largest collection and manipulation center of SARS-like viruses from that region, resembling this pandemic virus. So we've got the location.
Let me just make sure I understand what you're saying there. So you're saying that Wuhan is not a place where you would expect a natural ambient level of SARS viruses because the horseshoe bats don't live locally? Is that what you're saying?
No, so the horseshoe bats do live there, but to find the type of SARS virus, these scientists had to make trips every year far down south. So they had to travel thousands of kilometers down south to South China, to Yunnan. They even went across borders to Southeast Asia down south. So they were collecting across 8.
Oh no, we can't make a giant laboratory in the middle of a jungle. Oh fuck.
Countries in that belt where they predicted there was the highest prevalence of these type of viruses. So that type of bat, the horseshoe bats, do live broadly across China. But to find those viruses, you have to go very far down south. And so even
it is nice though that they built the laboratory really far away from the thing that they were studying.
Well, I mean, the lab still has to be in decent proximity so they can actually make the trip. They have to commute down to random caves to swab the buttholes of a bat to get viruses from it. They're straight up playing butthole surfers.
She said, the bats live there. So it's okay, then.
Yeah, so why are we talking about
happen
this?
there?
It's actually they have how a book, there's a cat, at a bookstore, there's all these bookstores have a cat. They just keep a couple bats at this, it's like their pet.
Yeah, you walk into the Wuhan Institute of Virology and you're there petting Bat the Batty, who's there at the reception desk to check you in.
Very, very, very nice bat. Very nice bat.
This is a good bat. This bat gets all the pets.
This bat is voiced by Robin Williams.
The U.S. government to
The other one's voiced by Tom Hanks.
places, they recently published a map of the risk of being exposed to these viruses, and Wuhan is nowhere near the hot zone.
Because Wuhan's not a jungle; it's a city.
It's also like there's like places where like earthquakes are really common, but then sometimes a big earthquake happens in places where earthquakes are less common. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, it doesn't mean that there's no viruses ever coming from like this area. It just means that it's not a hot spot. Like,
well, when she's acting like the viruses respect city boundaries. Like, oh shit, we're coming up on a formal border. I guess I'll turn around and go right back into the bat now. Like, no.
You know, I would say if the breakout had started in like Antarctica, I think she would have a point.
Right.
Maybe.
But it didn't. It started in Wuhan, China, which is exactly where you would expect a SARS-like virus outbreak to start.
Well, not. I mean, it's a place where you might expect something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I can actually find you a map. There's a map I have somewhere. It might take me a second to dig it up, but there's a map of where like these bats, these horseshoe bats, like the species distribution, not only in China and in Southeast Asia. It is massive. It is a big boy map. They're everywhere. Like they're just straight up fucking everywhere. The entire Indo-Chinese peninsula is filled with these things. Yeah, you can keep playing it. I'll DM it to you.
Well, actually, we're up against it here. It's an hour and a half. It's too long.
Oh shit.
We do not do 3-hour podcasts. If somebody on Spotify, if you listen to it all the way through this, I'm sorry. This has been the Intellectual Dollar Tree, and I think HK is going to read us out.
All right. We do this show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific time, live on twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. So if you're listening on the podcast, come check us out. And then after the song we play at the end, you get to stick around and see us pal around for Red Light. If you want to support us, you can support us on either Twitch or you can support us at patreon.com/Echoplex. If you want to check out our other stuff, check out echoplexmedia.com. That's where you can find all of our other podcasts and shows. And if you're here live, stick around after the song for Red Light. This is Boomers by Periscope.